The room fell silent, the type of silence that sends chills down your spine. All eyes were on the small boy standing awkwardly on the witness stand, clutching the edges of his shirt nervously. At just 6 years old, Jaden's voice wasn't loud, but the weight of his words echoed across the courtroom like thunder. "Mommy's lying," he said, his tone steady but innocent. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The murmur of the spectators stopped. Even the tapping of the stenographer's fingers halted. Sophia Williams, seated at the plaintiff's table, visibly stiffened, her meticulously styled hair and pearl earrings suddenly outshone by the raw accusation from her own child. David Carter, the boy's father, sat just feet away, his jaw tightening as if bracing for a storm. The judge adjusted her glasses, the lines on her face deepening as she studied Jaden. The tension in the air was palpable, as though the truth itself was suspended, waiting to be unveiled. Everyone in that room had the same thought racing through their minds. Could the testimony of a 6-year-old shatter everything? Jaden's innocent declaration didn't just question his mother, it questioned the entire narrative that had been built up in that courtroom. The courtroom was a blend of polished wood, muted tones, and a suffocating sense of gravity. Judge Simmons presided from her elevated seat, her sharp eyes scanning every corner of the room. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor and decades of experience, she was the kind of judge who missed nothing, not a twitch, not a whisper, not even the faintest hesitation. Sophia Williams sat at the plaintiff's table, the picture of composure, at least, on the surface. Her tailored navy blazer was perfectly pressed, her pearl necklace catching the dim light each time she shifted in her seat. But those who looked closely could see her hands fidgeting beneath the table, her fingers absent-mindedly twisting the ring she wore on her left hand. Her lawyer whispered something into her ear, and she nodded quickly, though her eyes betrayed her unease. On the opposite side, David Carter sat stiffly, his face a mask of restraint. His light-colored suit seemed out of place against the dark tones of the courtroom, but he didn't seem to care. His broad shoulders were hunched slightly, and his hands clasped tightly on the table before him. The tension in his body was unmistakable, the kind of tension that comes from fighting battles you're not sure you will win. And then there was Jaden. Perched on the witness stand, the 6-year-old boy looked so small, so fragile against the backdrop of adult conflict. His legs swung just above the floor, unable to reach it. His oversized suit jacket, likely borrowed for the occasion, hung loosely on his tiny frame. Jaden's wide, curious eyes darted nervously between his mother, his father, and the judge. His small hands fidgeted with the microphone, unsure of what to do with them. The room seemed to watch him as though he were the linchpin to the entire case, because, in truth, he was. "Do you know why you're here today, Jaden?" the lawyer asked, her tone soft, almost too gentle. Jaden nodded hesitantly, glancing at his mother. "To tell the truth," he said in a small voice. "That's right," the lawyer continued, smiling encouragingly. "And can you tell us what happened the night your mommy and daddy argued?" Jaden hesitated. His tiny hands gripped the edges of the witness stand. He looked at his mother again, her polished face now pale, her eyes wide with unspoken warning. He then turned to his father, who gave him a slight nod, as though to say, "It's okay." "My mommy said, my daddy hurt her," Jaden began, his voice trembling slightly. The entire room leaned in, hanging onto his every word. "But," he stopped, swallowing hard. "But what, Jaden?" the lawyer pressed gently. Jaden's lips quivered, and for a moment, it seemed he might not speak. Then, as though summoning all the courage his little body could muster, he blurted out, "Mommy's lying." A collective gasp swept through the room. Sophia's lawyer shot up, objecting to the line of questioning, but the judge silenced him with a single raised hand. Jaden's words hung in the air like an invisible weight. Sophia's composure cracked for a fleeting moment, her face flushing red as she whispered something harshly to her lawyer. David, on the other hand, leaned forward slightly, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. The judge turned her attention to Jaden, her voice calm but probing. "Jaden, can you explain why you think your mommy is lying?" The boy hesitated again, his small shoulders sagging under the pressure. Because Daddy didn't yell at mommy," he said finally. Mommy was yelling. And she told me to say that Daddy hit her, but he didn't. The courtroom erupted. Spectators whispered, Sophia's lawyer objected again, and David exhaled sharply, his head falling into his hands. Judge Simmons banged her gavel, calling for order. Sophia sat frozen, her polished facade now a fragile shell. Her son's words had done what no amount of legal argument could. They had brought the courtroom to a standstill. All eyes returned to Jaden, who sat quietly, his small frame now radiating a strange, innocent strength. The truth had been spoken, and the weight of it was undeniable. Sophia Williams stood up, adjusting her blazer as she made her way to the stand. She was poised yet visibly emotional, her hands clutching a tissue that she dabbed at the corner of her eyes. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she began her plea, her voice trembling just enough to convey vulnerability. Your Honor, she began, her voice cracking slightly, I have been Jaden's primary caregiver since the day he was born. I was there for his first steps, his first words, every scraped knee and bedtime story. Everything I've done, every sacrifice I've made, has been for him. She paused, looking toward the gallery, where a few spectators nodded sympathetically. Sophia described the long nights she spent nursing Jaden through fevers and how she put her career on hold to dedicate herself to his upbringing. I've given up so much for my son, she continued, her voice thick with emotion. My dreams, my ambitions, they all came second to Jaden's needs. Because that's what a mother does. That's what love is. Her lawyer, a confident man with a commanding presence, stepped forward. Sophia, could you explain to the court why you believe Jaden's father is unfit for custody? Sophia exhaled deeply, her expression darkening. David has never been there for us. Not when Jaden was born, not when he started school, not when he needed a father the most. He's always been absent. Focused on his own life. She glanced briefly at David, who sat motionless, his jaw clenched tightly. Her voice rose slightly, filled with a mixture of frustration and sadness. A child needs consistency, stability. And I'm the one who has provided that for him. Jaden doesn't need a part-time parent. He needs someone who's there every single day. Sophia's lawyer nodded approvingly, stepping closer to address the court. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is a devoted mother. She has sacrificed everything for her child's well-being, while Mr. Carter has been nothing more than a distant figure. We ask the court to recognize the love, care, and stability Sophia brings to Jaden's life and grant her full custody. As Sophia returned to her seat, she allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Her lawyer's confident tone and her heartfelt pleas seemed to have swayed the courtroom. But beneath her polished exterior, a flicker of unease crossed her face, a hint that not everything she'd said was entirely truthful. It happened so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that it took a moment for anyone to react. Mommy's lying, Jaden's small voice cut through the air, soft yet piercing. Every head in the courtroom turned to the witness stand, where Jaden sat clutching the microphone, his wide eyes darting nervously around the room. Sophia froze in her seat, her face draining of color. David's head snapped up, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. Judge Simmons leaned forward slightly, her sharp gaze locking onto the boy. Jaden, the judge said gently, her tone calm but firm, what do you mean by that? Jaden shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his small hands fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. Mommy told me to say bad things about Daddy, he confessed, his voice trembling. The room erupted into murmurs, forcing the judge to bang her gavel for order. Sophia's lawyer jumped to his feet, his objection ready, but Judge Simmons raised a hand to silence him. Let the boy speak, she commanded. Jaden's eyes filled with tears as he continued. Mommy said that Daddy didn't love me. But I know he does. He sniffled, wiping his face with the back of his hand. She hid his letters and the pictures he sent me. I found them in her drawer. Sophia's composure cracked, her hands trembling as she clutched the table in front of her. Jaden, that's not true, she blurted out, but the judge silenced her with a stern look. David leaned forward, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Jaden, he said softly, his voice barely audible, is that really what happened? Jaden nodded, his small shoulders sagging as though relieved to finally share his truth. I wanted to see you, Daddy. I missed you. The weight of his words was unbearable. Sophia's lawyer looked flustered, flipping through his notes as if searching for something to salvage the situation. Sophia, on the other hand, looked like she might crumble into her seat. The judge addressed Jaden once more, her voice softening. Jaden, do you feel safe with your daddy? Jaden nodded again, his voice growing stronger. Yes, ma'am. Daddy never yelled at me or hurt me. He just wants to see me. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing down on everyone present. Jaden's innocence, his longing for a father's love, had cut through all the legal posturing and falsehoods. David wiped his face with his hand, trying to hold back his emotions. Sophia stared at the floor, her carefully constructed narrative unraveling before her eyes. As the judge called for a brief recess, it was clear that the case had taken a dramatic turn. Jaden's small voice had carried a truth that no one in that courtroom could ignore. The battle for custody was far from over, but one thing was certain, Jaden's words had shifted the tide. David Carter sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly on the table in front of him. His face betrayed a mix of heartbreak and hope, his usually stoic demeanor crumbling as Jaden's words echoed in his mind, Mommy's lying. For years, he had fought tirelessly for a chance to be in his son's life, and now, for the first time, it felt like the truth was finally breaking through. His eyes welled with tears, but he quickly wiped them away, determined to remain strong for his son. Across the courtroom, Sophia Williams appeared a shadow of the confident woman who had delivered her statement earlier. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table, her eyes darting nervously toward the judge. The carefully crafted image she had presented was unraveling, piece by piece, under the weight of her son's honesty. She whispered hurriedly to her lawyer, who seemed equally flustered, flipping through papers as though the solution to their crumbling case might be hidden somewhere in his notes. Judge Simmons leaned back in her chair, her sharp gaze shifting between the two parents before settling on Jaden. Jaden, she said in a calm, measured tone, thank you for sharing how you feel. I want you to know that this is a safe place, and you can tell us anything you'd like. Sophia's lawyer stood abruptly. Your Honor, I must object. The judge raised a hand to silence him. Mr. Clark, this court is committed to understanding what is best for Jaden. His voice matters, and we will hear him out. Her tone left no room for argument. Turning her attention back to the parents, Judge Simmons spoke decisively. I am ordering an immediate review of all communication records between the parties, including emails, texts, and phone logs. This court must determine the extent of the claims made today. David straightened in his seat, his expression resolute. This was his chance to prove he had tried, that he had always cared. Meanwhile, Sophia's panic was palpable. She whispered fiercely to her lawyer, her polished facade crumbling under the weight of the judge's words. Jaden shifted slightly in his seat, his small hands fidgeting nervously. Can I say one more thing? He asked, his voice hesitant. Judge Simmons nodded. Of course, Jaden. Take your time. Jaden looked down at his lap for a moment before speaking. I just want everyone to stop fighting. I love Mommy, but I love Daddy too. His voice trembled, but his words were clear and unwavering. The courtroom fell silent again, the weight of the child's honesty pressing down on everyone present. Jaden's words lingered in the air like a fragile truth, delicate but undeniable. I love Mommy, but I love Daddy too. I just want them to stop fighting. His small voice carried a plea so pure and simple that it cut through the tension in the room. Sophia couldn't hold it together any longer. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The polished, composed woman who had delivered a passionate plea for custody was now a mother confronting the consequences of her actions. Tears streamed down her face as her carefully constructed narrative unraveled entirely. David, on the other hand, sat frozen, his hands gripping the edges of the table as if steadying himself. His chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths, and his eyes glistened with unshed tears. It was as though his son's words had pierced through years of frustration and heartbreak, offering a glimmer of hope he hadn't dared to imagine. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, a mixture of pity, admiration, and unease. Even the spectators, who had initially viewed the case as just another custody battle, couldn't help but feel the emotional weight of the moment. Judge Simmons leaned forward, her expression softening as she addressed Jaden. "Thank you for sharing that, Jaden. What you've said today is very important, and I want you to know that we're all here to make sure you're happy and safe." Jaden nodded, his eyes darting toward his parents before lowering to his lap. "I just miss Daddy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't want him to go away again." Sophia's sobs grew louder, and she shook her head, trying to speak through her tears. "Jaden, I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was doing what was best." Her voice cracked, and she looked toward David, her expression a mix of regret and desperation. David's gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Pain, anger, and perhaps a shared understanding of their son's innocent wish. The judge cleared her throat, drawing the room's attention back to her. "This is a highly emotional case, and it's clear that Jaden's well-being must remain our priority. I will be taking a temporary recess to review all presented evidence and communication records. Upon return, I will deliver a ruling that reflects what is truly best for Jaden." As the gavel struck, signaling the recess, Sophia slumped back into her seat, her face pale and tear-streaked. David stood slowly, his gaze fixed on his son. Jaden looked up at him, his small face etched with a mixture of fear and hope. David walked over hesitantly, crouching down to Jaden's level. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "No matter what happens, I'm always here for you. Okay?" Jaden nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek as he reached out to hug his father. In that moment, the courtroom didn't matter. The evidence didn't matter. All that mattered was the bond between a father and son, one that had endured despite all odds. The courtroom slowly emptied, the air still thick with the echoes of Jaden's heartfelt words. Sophia remained seated, her hands trembling as she stared at the polished table before her. The weight of her guilt settled over her like a heavy fog. She had always told herself she was protecting Jaden, shielding him from pain, but today she had been forced to confront the truth. Her choices had hurt her son more than she'd ever realized. David stood a few feet away, watching Sophia with a quiet expression. His shoulders were still tense, but there was no gloating in his demeanor. Instead, there was a flicker of hope that maybe this painful chapter could lead to something better for all of them. He took a deep breath and glanced toward Jaden, who sat on a nearby bench, swinging his legs and clutching his favorite stuffed animal. Jaden looked up and caught his father's gaze. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of relief, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from his tiny shoulders. Speaking the truth had been scary, but it had also been freeing. He no longer had to carry the burden of choosing sides. Sophia finally stood, brushing a tear from her cheek. She hesitated, then walked over to Jaden and knelt beside him. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I just wanted to protect you, but I see now that I made mistakes. Can you forgive me?" Jaden nodded, wrapping his arms around his mother. "I love you, Mommy," he said softly. "But I love Daddy too." David watched the scene quietly, his heart aching but also swelling with cautious optimism. Perhaps this moment could be the beginning of something new, a chance to build bridges rather than walls. The courtroom was packed again when Judge Simmons returned, her expression firm yet compassionate. She glanced at the parents, then down at Jaden, who sat between them with a nervous but hopeful look on his face. "In cases like this, emotions often run high," she began, her voice measured. "But today, one thing has become abundantly clear. Jaden loves both of his parents deeply, and he deserves to have both of them in his life." The judge took a brief pause, allowing her words to sink in. She turned her gaze to Sophia. Ms. Williams, as Jaden's primary caregiver, you have undoubtedly played an important role in his life. However, the court cannot ignore the evidence presented today, which shows attempts to alienate Jaden from his father. These actions do not serve the best interests of your son. Sophia's head lowered, shame flickering across her face. Judge Simmons shifted her focus to David. Mr. Carter, it's evident that you've made every effort to remain a part of your son's life despite significant challenges. The court commends your perseverance. However, co-parenting requires patience, understanding, and a willingness to move forward without resentment. The judge's tone softened as she addressed both parents. For Jaden's well-being, I am granting joint custody. Effective immediately, both parents will share equal time with Jaden, and all communication must be respectful and transparent. This court will not tolerate further attempts to undermine the child's relationship with either parent. The judge leaned forward slightly, her voice firm but empathetic. More importantly, I urge both of you to reflect on the lessons this case has revealed. Children are not pawns in a battle of egos. They are individuals who deserve love, stability, and the freedom to cherish both parents without fear or guilt. Turning her attention to the broader audience, she added, this case also serves as a reminder of the power of unity. Racism, division, and hatred have no place in our children's lives or our own. It's our responsibility to foster understanding, compassion, and a brighter future for the next generation. Jaden looked up at his parents, his eyes wide with hope. Does this mean I can see both of you now? He asked, his voice small but eager. David reached for his son's hand, and Sophia did the same, their fingers brushing for a brief moment. Yes, buddy, David said, his voice thick with emotion. You'll always have both of us. Jaden smiled, a hopeful, radiant smile that lit up the room. It was a small but powerful symbol of a new beginning, not just for his family but for the lessons they had all learned.